Welcome to the debate. If you've ever traveled to a country where you don't speak the language and, you suddenly come down with just a terrible flu, you probably know exactly the kind of quiet panic I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely. It is the absolute worst feeling.
Right? You walk into this brightly lit pharmacy, you feel awful, your throat is on fire, and you just want anything to make the pain stop. But as you stare at these giant walls of unfamiliar boxes, a terrifying thought crosses your mind. Like, what if I accidentally buy laxatives instead of cough syrup?
Yeah, because the stakes in that moment feel incredibly high. I mean, it's not like ordering the wrong coffee at a cafe. A mistake in a pharmacy actually has real physiological consequences.
Exactly. When we think of medical diagnosis, we usually picture something precise and clear-cut, like an X-ray. You break your arm, the doctor points to the jagged white line on the screen and says, there it is.
Clear as day.
But when you step into the world of second language medical triage, when you're relying on broken phrases just to communicate your symptoms to a pharmacist, that X-ray machine is suddenly completely broken. You are operating in the dark.
And really, the conversation we're having today is about how we prepare people to navigate that exact darkness.
Right. So today we're looking closely at a specific conversational training text. It's called At the Pharmacy, and it's designed to teach non-native English speakers how to survive these interactions.
Which is a huge undertaking.
It is. And the core issue splitting us today is basically this: does teaching language learners a highly structured, grammatically precise, and polite set of standardized phrases actually help them get the right medicine? I'll be arguing that yes. This structured, polite script acts as a vital, precise baseline. It gives people the exact tools they need to safely navigate the messy reality of getting healthcare.
And I'll be arguing that this approach is, it's basically a trap. Teaching someone to memorize a rigid, polite script creates a dangerous illusion of fluency. It prioritizes social etiquette over the raw, messy reality of medical triage, and ultimately, I think it leaves the patient completely stranded the moment a pharmacist gives a real, complex medical answer.
Well, to start, I think we have to look at what this text actually gives the learner. It provides a highly functional baseline built on specific, polite phrasing. We aren't just teaching a tourist to point at their head and grunt.
Sure, no one is advocating for grunting.
Right, but the text trains them to say, "Could you recommend something for a headache, please?" It drills down into the specific grammar of time, too. Like the difference between having a cough since Monday versus having a cough for 3 days. My perspective is that this level of exactness is a safety net. Mastering this script reduces the friction of the interaction. It ensures basic medical compliance in an environment where panic is usually the default state.
But look at what happens when you prioritize that perfect script, right? The framework is overly simplistic because it assumes a perfectly linear conversation.
How so?
Well, the text spends all this energy making sure patient asks, "Are there any side effects?" perfectly. But if you ask a complex medical question, you are going to get a complex medical answer.
I mean, hopefully, yes.
But a pharmacist is going to talk about drug interactions, contraindications, taking things on an empty stomach. Teaching a patient to memorize the question without equipping them to decode the highly technical answer, it's honestly irresponsible. You are sending them into deep water without teaching them how to swim just because they know how to politely ask for a boat.
Let's actually dig right into that idea of politeness, because I think you are entirely misjudging its function here. You're treating politeness like it's just social window dressing, like it's just about being nice.
Well, in a medical emergency, being nice is a luxury.
But it's not just about being nice. Look at the specific contrast the source material draws. It explicitly compares the blunt demand, "Give me something for a headache," with the collaborative request, "Could you recommend something for a headache, please?"
Right.
In a healthcare setting, politeness is a mechanical tool. It acts as a diagnostic tripwire. When you say, "Could you recommend," you're actively shifting the pharmacist's role. You're stopping them from being a cashier who just rings up a box, and you are inviting them to act as a clinician. You are triggering their professional duty of care.
I understand the mechanism you're describing. I do. But the moment you trigger that professional duty of care with a flawless, polite sentence, you accidentally trigger something else,
Linguistic camouflage.
Linguistic camouflage.
Yes, you walk up to a counter, deliver a perfectly constructed, "Could you recommend something for a headache, please?" And the pharmacist's brain immediately categorizes you as a fluent speaker. They hear that flawless rhythm and assume you can handle the nuance of a medical follow-up.
Which is exactly what you want. You want the follow-up. That is the essence of triage.
You want a follow-up you can actually understand. Look at the reality of the diagnostic follow-ups modeled right there in the text. The learner walks in armed with their memorized vocabulary word, cough. But the second they engage the pharmacist, the script flips. The pharmacist doesn't just hand over medicine.
Right, they investigate.
Exactly. They ask, is your cough dry or are you coughing up mucus? The polite memorized script shatters instantly. The text teaches the word cough, but it doesn't give the learner the tools to describe the viscosity of their respiratory fluids. By sounding so perfectly polite at the start, the patient accidentally accelerates the conversation into a level of complexity they cannot survive.
See, I completely disagree that the script shatters. You're assuming that a breakdown in communication means the whole system failed. It didn't fail, it got the patient through the front door.
Barely.
By providing the baseline vocabulary, runny nose, blocked nose, sneezing, the learner has enough foundational data to give the pharmacist a starting point. Yes, the follow-up question about mucus is hard, but without that polite opening, the pharmacist might not even pause to investigate the type of cough.
But what good is getting through the front door if you immediately realize you're in the wrong building? I mean, if the pharmacist follows up with, are you having difficulty breathing? Do you have chest pain? Which, by the way, are literal examples from the dialogue in the text. The stakes are suddenly life or death.
Of course they are.
So a misunderstood yes or no to chest pain isn't just a social mistake. It's a medical error. The framework sets the patient up to fail because it focuses on perfect initiation rather than messy survival.
You keep using the word perfect, and I really want to challenge your problem with precision here. You seem to think the text's focus on grammar is just a waste of time.
Because it is. Let's look at how the text treats grammatical precision in the common mistakes section. It heavily focuses on correcting the learner. It explicitly notes that "I have pain in my throat" should be replaced with "I have a sore throat" because it sounds more natural.
Right.
It corrects "I am fever" to "I have a fever." It goes out of its way to remind the learner that headache is a singular countable noun, so you must say a headache. I just cannot accept that this level of classroom pedantry belongs in a medical triage setting.
Why do you view grammatical accuracy as pedantry when it comes to medicine?
Imagine the actual scenario. A visibly ill, sweating person walks up to a pharmacy counter. They point to their neck and say, "I am fever. I have pain in my throat." Does the pharmacist understand the medical issue?
Well, yes, but
Absolutely. 100%. Native speakers are incredibly good at filtering out broken grammar in a crisis. They listen for key words: fever, pain, throat. The communicative goal is achieved. Dedicating precious cognitive load to remembering whether headache takes an indefinite article prioritizes a standardized English test over the pragmatic reality of just getting some ibuprofen when you're sick.
okay, that is a massive oversimplification of how human beings process language. And honestly, the text provides the perfect counterexample to your argument. Grammar isn't just about sounding natural. It is often the literal container for medical data. Let's look at the source's crucial distinction between the prepositions since and for.
You mean the rule about using since yesterday versus for 3 days?
Exactly. The text emphasizes that we use since with a specific starting point in time and for with a duration. I've had a cough since Monday versus I've had a cough for 3 days. You call this linguistic rigidity. I call it vital clinical data.
Okay, but
Let's just look at the mechanics of a medical timeline. If a patient mixes up their prepositions and tells a pharmacist they have had a severe symptom for Monday instead of since Monday, the pharmacist's brain hits a wall. The timeline of the illness becomes completely opaque. Are we talking about a symptom that lasted for a few hours on Monday, or one that has been raging continuously for 5 days?
I'm not saying timelines don't matter.
But the grammar is the timeline. In a pharmacy, the timeline dictates the severity of the intervention. 3 days of a cough means you get a lozenge. 3 weeks of a cough means the pharmacist tells you to go get a chest x-ray for pneumonia. If you don't teach the exact grammar of prepositions, You are withholding the exact mechanism the patient needs to communicate the severity of their illness. In this specific instance, grammar is not a classroom luxury, it is a medical instrument.
Okay. I will grant you the mechanics of since versus for. Time frames clearly matter in a clinical setting, and prepositions are how we measure time in English. But you are using one genuinely useful grammatical construct to defend an entire philosophy that I still think is fundamentally flawed.
How so?
Well, even if we agree they need the grammar to explain the past, the text completely fails them when it tries to prepare them for the future.
You're talking about the questions they are taught to ask.
Yes, the listening challenge section and the important pharmacy questions. The text trains the beginner learner to ask incredibly high-level questions, like, can I take this with my other medication? Or are there any side effects?
Which objectively are the most important questions any human being can ask to avoid an adverse drug event.
If they understand the answer. Teaching someone to ask, can I take this with my other medication, is reckless if you don't teach them how to decode what comes next. Let's just trace the mechanics of this interaction. The patient asks the question. The pharmacist then relies on reading labels, checking package instructions, or evaluating complex drug contraindications.
Right.
The vocabulary required to understand a pharmacist saying, this interacts with ACE inhibitors, or this may cause gastrointestinal distress if taken with dairy, is light years beyond I have a sore throat.
But you're assuming the pharmacist is going to use clinical jargon.
I'm assuming the pharmacist is going to answer a complex question with a complex answer. Teaching the question is practically useless if the learner lacks the vocabulary to comprehend the response. What actually happens is the patient asks the smart question, the pharmacist gives a 1-minute explanation about drowsiness and operating heavy machinery, and the patient, because of human nature and the embarrassment of being in a second language situation, just nods and says, yes, I understand. It gives the patient a completely false sense of security.
See, this right here is the crux of our disagreement, because you are entirely misinterpreting the actual function of teaching those questions.
Really? How so?
You are operating under the assumption that the goal of the question is for the patient to understand the pharmacology. It's not. The goal of teaching the patient to ask, are there any side effects, is to shift the cognitive burden.
Shift it to who?
To the expert. By asking the question, the language learner essentially forces the pharmacist to pause their routine, physically pick up the medication, and verbally synthesize the warnings. The patient doesn't need to know the medical science, they just need to know the phrase that makes the pharmacist do their job.
Okay, but if they don't understand what the pharmacist says...
Even if the learner doesn't understand every single word of the answer, the pharmacist's behavior changes. The pharmacist checks the label. They might physically point to a warning symbol on the box, like a picture of a car with a red slash through it. You are judging the phrase on whether it creates perfect comprehension, but its real value is that it alters the physical environment of the pharmacy. It slows the whole transaction down.
Wow, okay, that is a fascinating way to look at it. Language as a lever you pull to make the environment react to you. But pulling that lever still relies on the assumption that you have a perfectly patient, highly observant pharmacist who realizes they need to slow down and point at pictures on a box.
Most pharmacists are highly trained professionals.
Sure, but what if the pharmacist just rattles off a rapid-fire list of instructions? Look at the text's own dialogue for the pharmacist.
If your symptoms become severe, persist, or you're concerned, speak with a doctor.
That's a standard medical disclaimer.
It is a highly complex conditional sentence packed with medical nuance. If your symptoms become severe, persist, or you're concerned, if the learner nods along but actually misses the meaning of the word persist or severe, they might delay seeking critical care. They might sit at home with a worsening infection because they think the over-the-counter medicine they just bought is all they need. But again, the text anticipates this exact problem. It explicitly models what to do when a learner reaches the edge of their comprehension. Think back to the core dialogue. When the pharmacist asks if the patient has a fever, the patient doesn't just confidently guess. The text validates the phrase, I'm not sure, I haven't checked my temperature, or I don't think so.
Acknowledging you don't have a thermometer isn't the same as acknowledging you don't understand English.
It's the exact same muscle, though. The text models intellectual humility. It teaches the learner to establish a boundary. You ask the question, should I take it with food? And the text shows the pharmacist saying, check the package instructions. The whole script is designed to build a safety net,
where the pharmacist and the printed material takes over the heavy lifting of medical decision-making.
I just don't think a script is the best way to teach that humility. The alternative isn't to teach them nothing, and it isn't to abandon them in a pharmacy. The alternative is to focus far less on grammatical perfection and politeness and entirely on pragmatic survival skills.
Like what?
Like, don't spend time correcting "I am fever." Spend that time teaching them how to aggressively advocate for clarity. Teach them how to say, "Please speak slowly." Teach them how to say, "I don't understand the side effects. Can you show me the warning?" Teach them how to effectively pull out a translation app and hand it to the pharmacist. Relying on a rigid, scripted approach emphasizes etiquette over the ability to engage in true, dynamic medical triage.
But how do you engage in dynamic medical triage if you don't have the baseline vocabulary to get the process started? You have to be able to say cough instead of just pointing at your chest and making a sound. The text provides the most robust scaffolding possible for a fundamentally chaotic situation. By arming them with structured, grammatically precise baseline phrases, it gives individuals agency. They can walk in, describe their symptoms accurately, knowing the crucial difference between a runny nose and a blocked nose, and ask the necessary questions to initiate care.
You know, we are definitely circling a shared truth here, even if we are coming at it from completely opposite directions.
Which is?
That surviving a pharmacy in a non-native language requires an incredibly delicate balance. Yes, you need the specific vocabulary to turn the key and get the process started, but you absolutely must maintain the humility and, honestly, the sheer communicative bravery to stop the conversation when it goes over your head. Which, to its credit, the source text does attempt to model with those responses like, "I'm not sure." The humility to admit a lack of understanding really is the most crucial medical skill of all, whether you are speaking your first language or your fifth.
I entirely agree. It is fascinating to look at this material not just as a lesson plan, but as a window into human psychology. It shows us how we try to codify language for survival in high-stakes, everyday settings. It really suggests there is so much more to explore regarding how language directly intersects with healthcare access.
And how we build systems to bridge those gaps. Because no matter how well you memorize the vocabulary, the gap is always going to be there.
Which brings us back to where we started. When you step into that pharmacy in a foreign country, you're hoping for that clean binary X-ray. You're hoping for a simple, painless transaction where you hand over money and get the exact pill you need.
But the reality is always going to be messy. The symptoms are hard to describe, the answers are complicated, and the stakes are real.
The diagnostic muddy waters. And the central question we leave you with remains, is a polite, perfectly memorized phrase the tripwire that activates the help you need in the dark? Or is it just a polished surface that hides the true complexity of the maze?
A question without a simple answer.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.